Hello everyone, welcome back. We are here. It is about as close as we're going to get. This might be the last one I'm able to enter here. There'll be a text entry on Friday with some LCQ findings and things like that, but the last one for the videos here. I'm going to go down to the metagame. I went over the Dwarven Mind deck a bit, the Mulligan guide, some kind of examples. There's really too many situations to account for everything. I think you want a good mix of things. You always want a one drop, you want a Smee if you can have it. If you have a dock, you need a plan for it, or Rapunzel, you need to have a song to kind of help it out if you want to make that all work. And there's a ton of things to do with that deck, but we really can't afford to just focus too much on the deck. Even if you're playing it, you want to make sure you're knowing what you're playing against and how that's going to function here. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of jump right into it here. Our metagame share. So narrowing it down to everything within the last month, going to ink decks, kind of going through what's been played, what we expect to see, and it's pretty accurate. I have my own little sheet that's similar enough. I'm really focusing in on just the top few decks here that are being played as far as what you should see. Without a doubt, I still believe that Ruby Amethyst will be played significantly if you are at the LCQs. It is just a deck that's consistency is very high. It is a significantly better best of 3 deck versus best of 2 for the LCQs. And I think that we'll see it, do pretty well there overall. I would not recommend it for the Continental event itself, even if your name is, no, I'm not. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to tell you to do it. So let's start off with just saying that I think that it's a very good deck for best of 3. Not so much for best of 2. It does prey upon Ruby Sapphire, and if the perceived metagame, you're pushing forward and thinking that this number here, 16, is not accurate, and is going to be much more heavily represented like it was in Europe, which could be very well the case, then sure, maybe it's a good call for that. But I would advise against it if I'm making that choice here. Now, second up, we kind of have a little bit of a little cheat going on here because we have Amber Steel just kind of lumped together as its own thing, but really it's just going to be either Steel Song or Dwarven Mine. I don't know which. I don't know what percentage is going to be where, but yes, that's, I think, a good second thing to kind of go through as far as what you should expect to see. Whether it be Dwarven Mine or songs, you do have to attack them pretty well. You have to kind of make sure you're prepared for either situation. Even from the get-go, they do appear the same from the beginning point. Some of the key differences being cards like Calhoun versus Vanessa and things like that. But for right now, I would expect to be pretty even. Next thing up here, we have Ruby, a Sapphire, kind of the menace for Amber Steel players everywhere. I really think that this deck will be much more prevalent at Continentals itself than it's showing here. Again, a best of 3 deck, sure, but it does have the capabilities to hit the right matchups and hit the right strides and kind of do very well just in that sense. Really just an embodiment here of all the decks that you expect to see. One of the things I think is going to be flipped in some way is the Amethyst Steel and Sapphire Steel numbers. I expect to see more Amethyst Steel and Sapphire Steel. I really don't think that Sapphire Steel is in the right place, and I really wouldn't recommend bringing Sapphire Steel to the LCQs or even Continentals itself. Its matchup that it used to prey upon, Emerald Steel, I think is overrepresented here. The last month is not long enough to where we get to move out of a lot of what it used to be, and I think people are still not doing the right things with Sapphire Steel. We don't really have the best metagame to attack, and I don't think it has a very good matchup into the Amber Steel decks at all. And with those on the rise, because of myself and other people's results, really punishes Sapphire Steel. Same thing with Emerald Amethyst, also kind of kicked down a notch, I think, because of Amber Steel. It struggles there quite a bit. And Emerald Steel, really, it has the similar explosive start, and it can be very powerful, but I think it lost a lot of its luster with Genie entering the fray to really let it so that people can combat Genie just through challenge, or combat Diablo through challenging, and without that kind of added bonus that they get to have this character that even the Amethyst decks have a hard time challenging, it's hard to imagine that Emerald Steel survives too much. So I'm going to go through several different decks here and kind of do what I would play in each variation to cover all those bases here, get a good idea of what you might look like, or what it might look like, so on and so forth. So let's jump into that with this in mind here. I'm gonna go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not doing this one. We're gonna do Amethyst Steel instead. So we're gonna flop these and then do 6 decks that we, if playing these variations, what we're gonna do. And while I can say with all honesty that the Amber Steel deck that I'll show is what I'd play if it was right this moment, we still have the rest of the week and the LCQs to potentially change my mind as to what the final inclusions are going to be. So don't quote me on it. That list will likely not be shared, unfortunately, because it is a closed deck list and only 100 people. I'm not sharing it as I was. I think I mentioned that in previous variation or previous video I did, that just because of the nature, I was holding out hope that it'd be open deck list, in which case, by all means, but that's going to be kind of kept close. But if it were right now, this is where we'd be at. So let's dive in here to a deck I don't have too much experience with. Emerald Amethyst is a very aggressive deck. Obviously, we have a lot of characters there. One of the standouts I've seen kind of crop up here and there I wanted to include here is Prince Philip. Honestly, the 3/3 or the 3/2 with the ward. The card Grab Your Sword is an all-time low. I don't even think it's very good right now. I wouldn't play it in Amber Steel songs. It just doesn't kill anything. And having ward getting around Ice Block, Sisu, and things like that, really helping you cross the finish line with the character that doesn't get, Brawl, doesn't get Sisu, doesn't get Shrunk or anything like that. Really strong at fighting some of those Ruby Sapphire decks. And in any case, it can just challenge and trade. It doesn't get eaten fully by a Calhoun. So Prince Philip is a very good inclusion, I think. And we see that Bell has made its way out of not just the Ruby Amethyst decks, but also the Amethyst Steel decks, and also all the way here to Emerald Amethyst. The names are going to get me till the end of time. Bell really is seeing a significant increase in the set because of the Genie Wars. Genie on Genie fights are going to happen there. You see a shift here, Genie to Genie. It is very aggressive, and you do want to play 4 typically, but I think getting away with 3 here is fine. Rabbit is pretty important at grinding, and with Ruby Amethyst on the rise, Genie's a little bit better than Merlin, I think. You have Peter Pan to help fight those fights as is, and Gogo Tamago with the Crab can help take out opposing Genies. So being able to grind a little bit harder with the Rabbit, I think warrants it being a 3/3 split. You can easily do 4 Genies and 2 Rabbits. That's fine. I think you need 6 between the total, or 2 of them. But the Friends on the other side is really what was the 4th Genie. It just is inkable. So to help the inkable count, that's where we're at with this one. We have Curse Removal Bonsai, all the aggressive elements, and really Gogo Tamago helping this deck get a new facelift on what it can do and how it can play the game late into the end there. And Clarabelle, of course, the big one coming down sometimes off the shift line, most of the time going to be ink, the 1-cost one hitting items, but just being a versatile 1-drop that, sometimes you want to stop that ice block from hitting your bonsais and things like that. Certainly a fine card to include, just another 1-drop if need be. But this is where I would be at. I think that there's a lot to play with this deck. I would just be hoping to prey upon all the Ruby Sapphire decks with this one, and I think Ruby Amethyst is a fine matchup as well. You can get behind, but Prince Philip actually does a pretty good job at helping you keep aboard. Doesn't get Elsa'd, doesn't get hit by Brawl, doesn't get Medusa, doesn't die at all. So pretty strong there. Alrighty, here, let's go to the next list we're going to go through. Ruby Sapphire. So Ruby Sapphire is a deck, and this is a version I've been trying a bit here too. It might not be the most conventional of what you've seen, but this is where I ultimately would have settled on. I think we had some people try it at some local events. I haven't instructed a lot of people who are trying stuff not to play them at large events just because information sharing is a big thing right now. There's a lot of information being done. Really, since Europe, the Continentals there, the metagame's kind of been silent, except for Charlie's Collectible Show. It's not really had too much to show, and I think that certain tech cards and certain things to help include or help fight mirror matches and things like that are utmost importance. You'll notice here, no copies of Lucky Dime. I think with the Dwarven Mind decks springing up, I think that it's just too slow to matter. And as long as you have a hideaway of your own and you can find it with some copies of Vision, not a full set, I don't really like a full set of them for mirror matches, and you're often able to just have the mirror match come down to a really big grind fest, and hideaway stopping dimes and Maui Sharks getting Vitalosphere and things like that. And you'll see more Vitalospheres to help close the gap into other matchups. Also more items just for Hiram to sacrifice is pretty important there. Making your Sisu's challenge into Genies reasonably well. You need a little bit more help, but really Tipo and other things being able to immediately rush in and take out cards like a Piglet or anything like that, utmost importance. And 1 Let It Go, 1 Hideaway, kind of the tech cards for Maui Shark to rebuy. Pirate's Life has been pretty impressive. It is very stymieing when it comes to fighting against the Dwarven Mind deck and other things as well, with Green Steel as well being at its kind of lowest point it's been since we've seen it in set 5. I think adding a few more songs to your deck isn't that big of a deal, and we've already made that kind of sacrifice by playing cards like How Far I'll Go, which are vulnerable to that Ursula too anyway. But yes, 3 Sisu, 3 Be Prepared, keep them guessing. Be Prepared is significantly better in the mirror match as well, being able to answer cards like Tamatoa. That's also why you see 4 Maleficent Dragon. You also want to make sure that in the mirror match you have some way to go late. I think that, again, if we look at the metagame breakdown, we have a high representation of Ruby Sapphire being played, for sure. And I think Maleficent Dragon is one of the key cards in that matchup. I think if you're able to avoid inking Maleficent Dragon, or Tomatoes at any point, I think you have a pretty big advantage in the matchup. And as long as you also don't draw too many cards with your Harm Flavor Shams, you won't deck out. So really kind of, it's a huge grind fest back and forth, but I do usually find it that it's more of a chess match with this mirror match than anything else, as long as both players, have access to a hideaway with Maui Shark to be able to rebuy it, or just patient with it as well. We don't have cards like One Jump Ahead anymore, which can be clunky late, Quill, which can be useless at most points there. So we don't have the inconsistencies of randomly having some of our best cards be inked by One Jump Ahead, or a Quill just being forced to ink certain things in the matchup to get ahead when you have to throw away card to begin with. So I do like this deck. I don't like playing against it, but I like this variation specifically. I don't think, again, you'll see the reduction of Visions of the Future and only 2 copies of Grammatala. I don't think there's as much time to mess around as we would like. I've seen Maui, Hero of All, the 5 costs get shaved a little bit here and there, but I think you still need 3, especially with Dwarven Minds. How many times I've had just my Minds be very good against this deck because they've had to use their Mauis ineffectively has been very high. 3 Ice Block, I think I would love to play 4, but I don't know if I can. Vitalis here has been very impressive. Just an extra item, just a 1 cost thing to put into play. You could certainly go 2 Vitalisphere and 1 Shield of Virtue or anything like that, but really this is what I'm expecting to be seeing. And to help fight this matchup, a lot of decks had to adjust, and I think that it's really hard to adjust into a deck this powerful and hope to stave the same kind of matchups that you'd have going forward with anything else you're playing against. So this is about where I'd be at for this deck. I think the 1 net Let It Go and 1 Hideaway do wonders for mirror matches. If you wanted to make the mirror match better, maybe switch the numbers on Maui's, go 3 Shark Maui, 2 smaller Maui, but I think the 5 cost Maui is just too important here of all, just to help fight Dwarven Mine and other things, just big body, it's great. But Shark Maui is pretty good in the mirror match when you can Vitalisphere it in against an unsuspecting opponent, being able to replay cards like Let It Go. So I talked about how important Maleficent Dragon was to fight Tomatoas and things that just actually generate advantages. Be able to reuse a Let It Go is just insanely important. It would be easy to win. So that's Ruby Sapphire. Let's go here. A deck that I, not gonna lie, copy and pasted because I don't have much experience with this deck list, especially with this set being out. This is from Zan Syed. It is his deck that he played at the Cross Continental Challenge. I think that it's maybe optimized for this event. We've really seen, again, Green Steel not do as much as we thought it would this set. It didn't lose anything really, but it really didn't get anything, right? It got Heffalumps and Woozles. That's kind of the card it got. It had to shift some things around, and this version's playing 4 docks and less Prince Johns, but still playing discards. So what are you trying to do here? Number 1 card for this deck is actually, I would say, a Muses deck. The Muses, you see 4 copies of it here. Super helps control the board when in conjunction with Ursula 3 to double sing on turn 4 when you play the Muses. Really can make any threatening board 3 to 4 characters just go away. And that really gives it a good way into Dwarven Minds to help fight. But it is relatively inconsistent. We see Prince Johns, Diablos, Lucifers even. I don't quite understand the Lucifer idea. I would much rather see a card like Anna. A little bit more flexible, helps you challenge well, helps banish damage things, which can be very important against a deck. Cards like Rapunzel, you want to make sure they don't stick in play. If you can't kill them off entirely, it makes your Storms be able to take out Tomatoas if you have Annas. I would like this deck for the most part, assuming that the Dwarven Mine package is good in this deck. If you just replace Lucifers with Annas, 2 Annas is fine. We don't talk about Bruno's a little bit awkward when you don't have anything to sing with it, however, but I think it's still just as a 5 cost removal spell that sometimes draws a card when you have Prince John down. Fine. It's a song. You need enough songs or actions for Diablo. But yes, this is pretty stock standard. The reason, again, I think this deck has lost a lot of its luster is Genie. Not to say that you can do much to improve that situation, but the fact that Amethyst decks now just have a lot of ability on turn 5 to then check Diablos. Yeah, turn 5's a lot, pretty deep into the situation there, and you might have drawn 6 cards off Diablo by then, it feels like. But a lot of cases, them just having extra things that replace themselves, like they go around the discard package, as well as Elsa, Genie, and anything of the like make Diablo a little bit less threatening than it once was. Not to say that it's still not incredibly threatening, and when you get to, if you're playing against Cinderella on the opposing side, if you get to storm their Cinderella on turn 2 after shifting Diablo is hella hard to come back from. But that kind of ferocious opening is more manageable for whatever reason for this set. I can't quite put my finger on it. Although Diablo did, I think, get better into the Sapphire decks. They can no longer ramp on turn 2 when you're going first the same way they could before. One jump ahead is significantly better into a Diablo than Sail the Azurite Sea, because you actually give your opponent an extra card. With the Diablo, if you have to sail versus one jump ahead. So that's an argument for either which way, but sail dodges Ursula, and it's also inkable, so obviously sail is better. But yeah, just one little nod there to the Diablo getting a little bit better against the Sapphire decks than it once was. We see only 3 Ursula were played. That may have been just a proxy of him playing against the opponents that he knew he was going to play against in the top 4 of the Cross Continentals. I think 4 Ursula is probably where you want to be. What I would replace it with, I don't quite know, because again, the numbers in this deck look pretty odd to me. I think only playing 3, we don't talk about Bruno's, is fine in this deck without anything to sing it if you remove the Lucifer, but the biggest concern I have really is the inability to quest efficiently with this deck. It is a very grind you to a pulp deck, being able to use its ink over and over again with the mines, the hidden coves, singing, picking things up with muses, you're bouncing your own Ursulas, bouncing your own docks, replaying them, all those things. Disruptive elements with Ursula, Pete, Hefflumps and Woozles to stop people from questing out, and Sudden Chill and Hypnotize to hit the hand. So there's a ton going on here. It's been a deck that's won 2 DLCs, right? The only deck I think that's won 2. Is it 3, 2? I can't remember how many it's won. I think 3. Actually, I think it's won 3. It won Chicago, Las Vegas, and Seattle. So this is the deck that's won the most DLCs. So for it to win Continentals wouldn't surprise me, honestly. But what version of it, I really couldn't tell you. This version came out of nowhere, really, with the Continentals, Cross Continental Challenge that we had on Pixelborn Connect. And this deck really was good. It fell to Amethyst Steel, which we'll get to here just next, but definitely a thing to keep on your radar, and a deck I do expect to see. It definitely warrants still being, roughly 8 to 10% of the metagame, and maybe if you're playing LCQs, you play against it once. Maybe you see, I think, around 2 copies in 32, maybe 3 copies at most is what I would expect, if any. Again, the LCQ is going to be pretty random as far as what you play against, because it's a small sample size of a much larger sample size, and who knows what you're going to get if you just scoop your hand in the ocean and pick something out. So fine deck, for sure. Next up, one of the newcomers there, I'd say Amethyst Steel. It's a deck that's always been, and I will say always looks like one of the best decks in the game on paper. Amethyst Steel can do everything, right? It can draw cards, it can gain lore, it can remove characters, it can do all of those things, and it does them reasonably well. The thing is, typically this matchup or deck actually doesn't pair as well into some of the Ruby decks as it may seem. Having the looming effect of Be Prepared always kind of be there is a little bit difficult to get past. And while you can mitigate that with Pete, and be able to rebuy Pete bouncing it over and over again means you're not bouncing cards like Goat and Rabbit over and over again, so that the people who are playing Ruby Amethyst can bounce those things and kind of grind you out when you're trying to just stop them from Be Prepareding. And if you ever don't do that with Pete, then they just Be Prepared you, and you kind of are back to square zero. They get the first crack at with more resources. But this is a fine deck. There's a couple songs there, Strength, Storm, and a couple friends to round out some card advantage. You have Genies and Rabbits to draw a bunch of cards, of course, White Rose and Goat to cross the finish line, and a lot of aggressive 2-drops. Calhoun, Smee, really great 11 1-drops to make Snake sure it's a 2-drop at all times, really. And of course Genie and Belle to win the Genie fights, and Elsa, of course, just being Elsa, being fantastic. Not much to say. Crab's a newer inclusion. It's fine. I think it's pretty good into Dwarven Mine. It's not great elsewhere, and if you wanted to skew into more Ruby-based decks, I probably wouldn't play Crab. I'd probably play just more copies of either White Rose or maybe another 1-drop instead. But yeah, this is about as solid as it gets. I've been a fan of a deck like this for a while. I think that playing a card like Fire the Cannons in a deck like this is really poor. While it can be devastatingly good, I think it just ultimately a little too clunky for this deck needs to do to beat Ruby Sapphire and Ruby Amethyst. If you draw Fire the Cannons against either of those matchups, you're going to have a bad time. That's the simple way to put it. One thing you can also do with this deck, this is a much more mid-range version. You can include cards like Maleficent, the 1-cost one, where it's just a 1-cost 2 lore character, or cards like Doc. The issue with those cards, I think both of them don't really work well with having Genie and Merlin Rabbit in your deck. I think you'd have to remove Merlin Rabbit, and even then, Doc is very awkward with the card Genie in your deck. If you look at the templating for the Dwarven Mine deck, it's in such a way that nothing in its deck, aside from Storm, costs more than 3 and is uninkable. That's one of the rules of the deck, is I just couldn't afford to put anything in my deck that was uninkable that cost more than 2. Because if I did, then my docs got worse. So including a doc in a deck like this can be very powerful, and if you build your deck in a much more aggressive way, maybe not including cards like Zeus, Rabbit, and maybe having to play only some number of Genies versus a full set of 4, you can include doc in the deck. 3, 4, who knows. Bouncing Dock back and forth is a game plan. That is a way to kind of get around all the card advantage loss that you're losing by not playing Genies and Rabbits and Friends. But it is a little bit inconsistent. You have to really have Dock be good and also then pick it up afterwards. You have to draw the cards to return it after you play it, not just before, and drawing 2 Docks never feels good. But overall, I think a strong deck. I wouldn't be surprised to see some numbers of it. It's kind of the middling deck. It's the deck that takes the middle ground against a lot of things. While that is good for, I think, best of 3, I would not expect this to do terribly well in Continentals itself. It's a deck that I think has a little bit time struggles to winning going second. Not all the time. You see Calhoun kind of helping with that there, just being a good card to go second to help catch up and play a little bit of board control. But ultimately, I think it's just not as powerful as Dwarven Minds. The Amber Steel decks just have the inherent advantage. Really, this deck has good 1-drops, right? Followers, Diablo, Magic Broom are all good ones. But ultimately, let's just get to it here. Update on Dwarven Mind. Ultimately, Cinderella Ballroom Dancer is, or whatever it's called, Cinderella Ballroom Sensation. It's sensational. It's the best 1-cost card in the game. It just is. There's nothing that compares to Cinderella. There's nothing as good as it. Imagine a 1-cost card that just says you get 3 ink next turn. That's what it does. So it has the ability to exert to give you 3 ink for a turn. How insane is that? If you come from other card games, you know what the card, maybe Black Lotus is from Magic. It just, one-time effect, you get 3 ink. Well, this is a repeatable one where you get to use 3 ink over and over again. How insane is that? Sure, it's only for a specific type of card, but hey, that's still plenty good enough when that card is a removal spell. So when you get to play all your removal spells for free, Cinderella is one of the best cards in the game. You'll see some changes here. I've removed a couple copies of Pluto, went up to Sven's, cut down on Akita, and I swapped out some Happies for Simbas and removed one of the Calhouns. I think Calhoun is very good, but I don't think you need more than 3. Simba is another 1-cost card. I wanted to go up to 12 1-cost cards in the deck to have a much higher chance of always having one. With 12 1-cost cards from the get-go of essentially potentially full mulliganing up to 13 cards. When you mulligan 6 cards, that's almost full mulligan. That's 16 or 13 cards. You have a 96.3% chance to find a 1-cost card from the get-go. If you look at the top 13 cards of your deck, you're 96.3 from that point. If you have seen your hand and don't have a 1-drop, statistically from that point, you're looking at a 53 card deck with 6 chances to hit a 1-drop. You're about at 80%, or you're about 76% or so. And if you full mulligan, you're 80 something percent. So the actual chance once you've drawn your hand without 1-drops in it and mulligan 6 is going to be around, if you mulligan 6, around 76% to hit a 1-drop from there. But from every given hand of 13 cards, which you see, you should be about 96%. So I wanted to go up to that number. Previously with only 11, it was like 93% or 94%. I wanted a little bit more consistency there. Not much, and it is nitpicking. You can go an entire tournament or 2 without ever missing a 1-cost card, but I've done it before and it's not been fun. So that's why you're seeing a couple more cards being added to the 1-cost slot. And Simba, while not having the shift line in the deck, I think is totally fine. It is some misdirection. People may assume that it's there, or maybe it will be there in the future. I don't know. I might add it last minute. Uninkables are kind of something I also cut down on. We went from having 15 or 16 down to 15 here with removing a Calhoun, so I wanted to have my inkable count go up. And Simba in a pinch can discard a Calhoun when it's poor. You'll see if you look back at some of the coverage from the Charlie's Collectibles show, there were several situations where I had to just play Calhoun out over a Piglet even against blue-red because I just didn't have ink. And I had a second Calhoun and a Storm, and I couldn't make use of the card, so it was really awkward. So Simba is a 1-cost card, helps smooth out the draws a little bit. Probably the worst of the ones. Daisy and Cindy are still cards I'd rather play over Cinderella. Cinderella because it's better. Daisy because you have to play it because it's not inkable. But Simba is going to come down at some point. And hey, if you have a card later, or if you feel like discarding a Lilo, which I've done less than you may think, I think still playing the Lilo is probably correct in most situations rather than discarding it, unless you have a plethora of options. Still fine. More 1-drops are great. Calhoun is great. Smee is great. Best 2-drops you can play really in the game almost are those 2 cards, honestly. They gave Steel some bangers as far as the 2-drop slot goes too. Lawrence and Pete, of course. I went over this deck several times. I don't really think there's much to say here. Sven is better into, I think, Amethyst decks than Pluto is with the Rise. Just in general against a card like Mim Fox, even they can just throw a small card into the Pluto and then finish it off with Fox. Then there's a Fox in play, which if you don't have the Cindy to storm it, still wrecks your day. Where Sven just lets you untap your Piglet and keep questing, or untap your Lilo, or protect your Smee, or double sing with Lawrence. Sven's been pretty good. It's a worthy card, but I still want one Pluto. I think Pluto's fine. It's not amazing, but it's fine, and it's probably going to be ink again 90% of the time, much like the Simba that you're going to play. But yeah, we've talked about this one enough. Mulligans and details on that, you can go back to the previous video I posted here and go through that a bit more. But this is, if I had to submit right this second, where I'd probably be at. Still trying to figure out the last little bit of details to go through to see if any changes would be made. If anything surprises me at the LCQs, there might be some changes made. Who knows? I might audible to one of the other decks that we see here. And I highly doubt it. I probably just shouldn't bring anything else just to avoid doing that, because that's probably a mistake. But hey, you never know. Yes, this is where I'd be at for the events here for now. So lastly here, we're going to steal something from our friend here. No, I'm not, Kendall Bernadette. This is the list I believe he played over the weekend at the Star City 2K event. I believe this is the most recent one, or the one he liked the most. You'll see 3 and 3 on Genie and Merlin splits. A couple crabs have made them way back into the deck, and the Olaf. I think the Olaf and the crabs are helping to fight Dwarven Mine. I think that the matchup for Dwarven Mine into this deck when Dwarven Mine's going first is very positive for Dwarven Mines, and when going second, it's only slightly even. So I think this deck does struggle a little bit into that matchup if you're an experienced player. Even if this person who's piloting Ruby Amethyst is experienced, they can certainly struggle to win going second. It's very hard to overcome some of the starts that can happen. A well-timed Strength of the Raging Fire on a Sisu or a Genie can really take the wind out of the sails entirely, and as long as you don't play into their foxes, you have a lot of free reign as the Amber Steel player. But yes, this is where he's at. I like going up to 9 1-drops. I would respect his decision there. I like cutting the Flynn. Flynn has been very unimpressive for a long time now. It's a card that sometimes is amazing, but most of the time I think is just not very good, and I think he would not play it if he could make everyone playing this deck also not play it. Because I think when you have one and they don't, and you're on the play and you have a Sisu, the person who's going first is going to be down a card in hand with the Sisu, so their Sisus are going to be bigger than the opponent's card in hand, so the Sisus are going to go off. So you kind of need Flynn to help check Flynn's on turn 2. Happens, because you don't always get 2 Madam Mim, and you don't always have your Turnbox followers. I like the deck. I still has the 1 Bell, the 3 Maui is fine. 1 Tremaine is a nice little sneak up card there. The Dragonfire, I can't say I love, but I respect it. I think there's a card I'd play over it. I think it's Lose the Way. The 2-cost Amethyst action that you get to exert a character and you can discard an additional card to lock it down for an additional turn. While it's not as good as Dragonfire in the mid to late game, I think earlier on just being an inkable is pretty important. The deck is only 14 on inkables, but still, with a card like Sisu in your deck and be prepared, you really need to make sure that you're hitting all your ink drops going up the curve. So I like this deck list. I would want to find a way to get the 4th Genie back in there. I think this deck actually benefited the most from Genie out of all the Amethyst decks, just as a way to help fasten their clock. And this really went from a deck previously to set 5 where there was no Sisu even and no Flynn, where it was all about grinding and one thing at a time and going slow and keeping going, to where now with a card like Sisu and Genie, you really have a lot to be able to press the accelerated button there and go questing fast, a real thing. Awesome deck list. The 1 Sisu I've also not really liked. I just wanted to be prepared. But I can understand certainly against the Dwarven Mine decks, Sisu is probably pretty good. Makes them have to respect the small Sisu, which you're going to play anyway. Really powerful and really scary. And certainly from my perspective, the small Sisu in this deck is much more threatening than it used to be. I used to not have to care. But now when they're going into their 6-ink turn and they might have Sisu, so I might have to kill it over a Genie even. But who knows? I think that the rest of the numbers of the deck look great. We're still in the no locations realm, which is a stark contrast to where we used to be. I don't know what's really changed. I think the game just sped up a bit, and the matchups, even against Ruby Sapphire, where people were having the castles be really good. If you look at the list I just had up here earlier of Ruby Sapphire, there was 3 Vitalospheres, which a Vitalosphere with a crab or a shark or just a Maui 5 immediately kills the castle. So castle definitely at its lowest. It's been out. And I certainly respect that. But yeah, I think that these are the decks I would expect to see. Really, again, the different decks we'll see here, you're getting a small sampling at the LCQs. You're really not doing much. I wouldn't touch the Blue Steel, even though that was the deck that got me to this North American Championship. I top-8'd Chicago with Blue Steel. It's not the deck it used to be. Unfortunately, I think the other decks have just sped up more so than this deck gained much or lost much. It doesn't have really great answers to Daisy is the biggest thing, really. That's, I think, its biggest issue. You could try playing cards like Argus, which I've done before in the past, when Steel Song was less prevalent and Argus was really there to check Sisus, but with as much Steel Song going on, or Amber Steel Mine, whatever you want to do it, Argus doesn't look very great, and there's no great answer to Daisy Duck in this color, or Lawrence, really. I mean, all those things are just pains, and this deck can't keep up with some of the Amber Steel decks, and even the Green Steel decks or the Ruby Sapphire decks always been traditionally an issue for this deck in the eyes of most people. Even Ruby Amethyst, when you try and play this deck into Ruby Amethyst, they have Genies now. Genies are just a very big deal to have to fight, so I would shy away from this. But I think these 6 decks, Ruby Amethyst, Amber Steel, Ruby Sapphire, Emerald Steel, Emerald Amethyst, and Amethyst Steel, and I totally could only say those that fast because I'm looking at them right now, are the decks to see. You're going to see. Sure, people are going to be yelling at me in the comments about Blurple, and while Sapphire Amethyst is a deck that you can register, I would recommend against it, except if you're expecting to see a ton of Ruby Amethyst. That's the one matchup I think it's actually reasonably good against, but everything else I can't fathom it. I can't understand it. Maybe against Ruby Sapphire you're fine too, but I wouldn't want to play Blurple against Amber Steel. No way, no how. It's not a good time. So if you're aiming to fight Ruby Amethyst, then sure, maybe Blurple is the way to go, but I would avoid it with like the plague for right now. So that's been kind of the metagame breakdown here. What I expect to see and more. Really have come to the conclusion here of what we're going to do. Look for an article up kind of going into tournament practice. So I'm going to put it out tomorrow, so that, not tomorrow, Thursday. It's not Thursday yet. It's Monday. It's Tuesday. It's Tuesday. So on Thursday, you're going to see essentially on my flight to Continentals here, go through a lot of tournament practice procedures, whether you're playing in Continentals itself or the LCQs, things to do and don't do. Tournament etiquette, what you should do to keep yourself kind of spry and ready to go, because even though it's only 5 rounds, it can be a long day. You don't know how long those rounds are going to take, and you do have a lot of time for them, so look for that. And just an overall tournament procedure update here as far as what we can do and what you should do. Be courteous and kind to those who are all trying to win, but you're also there to have fun too. I'm going to do the same at the event itself. I will be looking to win, but certainly going to have fun. But till next time, guys, good luck, and I will see you guys there.